Hey everyone. So today I am sharing a conversation that I had with Stavit Sinai. She's an activist and academic whose journey took her from Haifa in Israel, where she was born and raised in a very traditional Zionist environment, to where she is now, which is a fierce critic of the system she grew up defending, and as you'll soon see, a participant in the direct actions to try to slow down or literally break the systems involved in that process. And this conversation is not just about activism. It's about the trajectory of someone who began to actively confront the dominant narratives around her. Stav is heavily involved with a group called Palestine Action. They're a direct action group based in the UK. Their tactics, which range from factory occupations to what might be called vandalism, breaking machinery, spray painting slogans, sometimes chaining themselves to fences. I'm showing some of their videos here on the screen, are aimed at disrupting companies like Elbit Systems. Elbit manufactures drones and other military technologies, which Palestine Action accuses of being complicit in Israeli war crimes in Palestine. And Stav talks openly about these risks and decisions and what it means to her to be part of these efforts. I have some of those kind of actions that they participate here, but there's many more. Stav is not involved in all of these, but you kind of get the idea. But more importantly, this is a story of personal change and a bit of an awakening. Stav's journey from growing up in a Zionist framework in Haifa to becoming a vocal critic of the very ideologies she was raised with is really at the heart of this discussion. And I know this is a long video, you could see the length down there, so remember that, as always, I try to structure these episodes with chapter markers so you can easily jump around, but I do encourage you to listen to the whole conversation and to pay attention to moments in her story that really underline some of the important psychological and philosophical elements. And on that exact note, at one point in the interview, after she mentions a particular psychological phenomenon, I break into the conversation, or out of it, as it were, back into this setting, to more deeply explore what I find to be one of the most important and pivotal concepts in psychology, and that's cognitive dissonance. So look out for that because it's just insanely important. It was first outlined, and I really would say discovered, by the psychologist Leon Festinger in the 1950s. It's really just a key idea for understanding the discomfort that arises when new experiences start to clash with deeply held beliefs, which is central not just to Stav's journey, but to any kind of radical reevaluation of our worldviews, which I have no doubt is being experienced in more profound ways for so many people, especially in the West over the past year. And this concept of cognitive dissonance has become absolutely essential to my ongoing mission to bring psychology into dialogue with philosophy to make sense of the world, particularly in the realm of moral philosophy. So you'll hear that. It involves turning wooden pegs and being offered different amounts of money, so you won't want to miss that part. And then lastly, for those who are following my recent work, I want to mention that I do have an interview with Juan Cole that's still in my queue, but I've decided to push it back in order to bring you this conversation with Stav, followed by a short essay that I'm currently working on to explain and defend my decision to submit a blank ballot in this year's U.S. elections, and then wait to release more of these long-form interviews until after the U.S. election, which certainly just swallows up a lot of attention and the airways during its cycle. So look out for another forthcoming essay in the next week or so that I'm calling Genocide and the Single-Issue Voter. But now, thank you for being here. I really appreciate the growing audience and people who've been paying attention to me lately. I promise to take that responsibility really seriously. And so now enjoy this thought-provoking and challenging conversation with Stavit Sinai. I just learned of your life story very recently, but I want you to tell me. So tell me your upbringing and where you were born, what kind of maybe politics and philosophy was swimming around your head, and then take me all the way to the picture that I'm going to put on the screen of you holding a very big gun. I don't know if you in the IDF there, or is that pre-IDF? I don't even know how any of that works. So take me through who you are. Where did you start?
So thank you, Jay. I was born in Apartheid, Israel, in the city of Haifa.
Hi.
and was born to a Zionist family. Um, Both of my parents were born originally in Romania. My father was born in the very end of the Second World War, in January 45, and he is considered a Holocaust survivor. My mother was born in around that time, a bit later. And so I come from a Holocaust surviving family. And my grandfather on my maternal side of the family, has survived one of the most horrific pogroms or acts of terror against community of Yashis. Was originally from the city of Yash or Yasi or Yashi, depends on how you pronounce it. And it is known to be one of the most horrific acts of atrocities happening in Romania in the history of the Holocaust. Some of the family members have been killed on the spot, and he was put on what is known as the death trains and was sent to a concentration camp uh, where he was forced um, to do labor, forced labor. And under great hardships and suffering, he managed to survive. And later on, he had to go back to his hometown. The family came from a fairly well-established background. It had property. My grandfather was a man of profession. He was also a musician. Um, and he survived the Holocaust and basically unwilling to go through the whole thing again. He um, we can say like there were like Zionist missionaries that were basically organizing the like vast immigration of Jews from Romania
Like
to
just pre 1948, like in that little window.
so my father was arrived to Palestine even before the state was
Right.
established, I believe, and while my mother was has immigrated in 52.
Gotcha. Okay. So right around
Yeah,
the partition. Yeah. Okay.
exactly. So basically, I don't think there was a much ideological motive there, but just out of great fear of going through the whole thing again,
Yeah.
they basically escaped, saving their lives, and then immigrating to the newly established state of Israel, also undergoing great suffering, trying to integrate and into this new sphere. So my grandfather basically had to build roads and do a lot of manual labor. And later on, he was able to establish his own business and was able to kind of have um, a life, you can say. So both of my parents were, um, unlike the previous generation, they were more committed to the political ideology of the state, I can say. They were rather more a Zionist. You can say my father is a more of a liberal Zionist, my mother less so. So I kind of got to both ends of the Zionist spectrum growing up.
I'm going to interrupt a few times
Yeah,
as we get up to that photo
yeah,
that we're not even really at your childhood yet, but just so people who are new to this conversation or these words. So when you say Zionist there,
yeah.
is you sort of answered it there, but it's not like an overt religious, like this is God's land and we're reclaiming the land. Maybe you said your mom might have had a little more of that story and your father was a little more of the, I don't know what you would call, like you say, like what do you really mean there by liberal Zionism, just so people understand how to parse that.
Uh, Actually, well, it's like two different shades of basically
Yeah.
the same ideology. One appears to be more liberal, namely, has more willingness to accept life of coexistence, you can say, and the other is rather more less inclined, less tolerate of having other forms of existence rather than that of the kind of Jewish dominance over the land. I don't I like both currents go back to actually the 1920s, for example. Like if to go back to the political roots of those two currents, one is like can be drawn back to Jabotinsky's famous essay called The Iron Wall, where he basically said we need something like an iron wall against which the natives could never stand, namely an imperial power that will back us up. The other current, which can be seen in groups such as the Ally of Peace or Brit Shalom in Hebrew, is a group that propagated coexistence with the native people of the land, namely the Palestinians, but completely overlooking their own role as colonizers of the land. And indeed, one of the main founders of that group was Arthur Rupin, who was like one of the arch colonialists of the land and one of the greatest racists in the entire history of the region. He was also the one who established the department of the then called the Sociology of Jews in the Hebrew University. So it can be drawn back, those differences can be drawn back to the 1920s, but frankly, I don't know which one is worse. I believe that the liberal stream is much worse because it is exactly those political currents that prevents people from shifting or converting, you can say, from Zionism to humanism, because it does render some kind of form of legitimacy to the whole enterprise, which has absolutely zero legitimacy.
Yeah. I'm going to earmark that because I feel like we're going to circle back to that point with U.S. politics, but a lot to say about that. But I want to keep going through your story. So take me through your childhood. What kind of schooling? What kind of did you ever have Haifa? For people who, I'll put it on a map here. Like all Israelis, is not far from the Palestinians. But did you ever interact? Were you allowed to interact? How much did you know about sort of what was happening? Just next door.
My upbringing was under very protective conditions. I did not know where Palestine is. Even the term was, I guess, could be unfamiliar to me. The kind of overall discourse referred to Palestinians as Arabs. My father did employ 48ers in his business.
What do you mean by 48ers? Sorry, I don't
48ers, namely Arab Palestinians who carry Israeli citizenship, namely people who survived the Nakba and remain in Haifa, you can say. So, but growing up, I did not have much contact with children my age who are Palestinians, a part of very rare occasions, but of course it was outside of, like, it was an extracurricular activity, stuff like that. So I had no contact, and it's not surprising because Haifa is a segregated city. Although it is considered to be a city of coexistence, it is highly segregated.
Yeah, so keep taking me through then your junior high school. Again, I'm still curious when and where that picture was taken because I know what happens next.
Yeah, definitely. So basically, I was very much focused on my studies, of excelling in school. I was very much interested in reading. I was like reading books since the moment I've learned to read, and was basically was raised to think, to believe that I could be a great officer in the military or a public servant or something of great importance, such as a diplomat or working for the foreign. My parents really invested a lot of energy into my future, basically. And I'm thankful for that. They enabled me, they always provided me with all the books I wanted, which is, I think, it's a great privilege to have had that as a child. And I was also able to develop my interest in science and nature. It was it was also, I was also surrounded by dogs and cats, which were like, made me really happy. And still to this day, it's like, I'm really like, that was the best part of my childhood, basically.
Mm.
But it was also like when I was 5 years old, there was like the Gulf War.
Mm.
And I remember like being woken up in the middle of the night, my father wrapping me up with plastic paper, just basically trying to prevent chemical gas from
Jeez.
touching me. So it's in the middle of the night, there are like sirens going on. So like a great fear um, of that. And I was basically a product of my own education.
Mm.
I was a Zionist myself, and I was completely devoted into contributing to my society and into protecting and defending my own country. And you can say I was even like and I've done so with great fervor.
Yeah. And at that time, Zionism,
Yeah.
did it mean anything? Did you believe in God? Did you have a religious, like, divine commandment to do so? Were you confused about that? Or was it just sort of wanting to please your parents and be like a good pupil in the world?
Yeah, I was. I think I was also volunteering in my synagogue.
Mm-hmm.
Like the school I went to was one of the best schools in the country. This is the school where, for example, not that I have any appreciation to Yuval Noah Harari, but
Mm-hmm.
he was raised in the same environment. He went to the same school, and a few other public figures came from Leobeck
Mm-hmm.
Educational Center. It is a school that was originally established in Berlin, in Germany, prior to the Second World War, and then was moved to apartheid Israel. And I took part in the religious activities of that
Mm-hmm.
school, and I was, yeah, very much committed to that community and to its religious agenda, which was rather more liberal. It's like a reform synagogue, which
Mm-hmm.
means that women can also lead prayers and can take initiatives, and like men and women are sitting all together and not separated. So I thought that kind of really fit the kind of feminist agenda I had at the time,
Mm-hmm.
that women can do anything just like men. So I was also very much emerged within that false ideology of liberal feminism,
Yeah.
liberal Zionism. Basically, I think it's like in my senior year in high school, we were all sent to a pre-military camp.
Mm.
That's where the photo was taken, me holding a gun. And I was told, oh, you're going to be like the the best soldier there. So everybody, like the educational staff, placed high hopes upon me. But I didn't. I was like very far from meeting those hopes and those demands, because I realized going there, it was like I went there with great enthusiasm, but coming there, I realized that that's absolutely not for me. So I was interested in poetry in that time and literature, and reading Anna Karenina and Dostoevsky, and reading like beautiful poetry. And I did not want to run around with a gun in the desert, having a commander barking commands in my ear. And I just didn't realize what's the purpose of it all. And the conditions were really awful, like just sleeping in a tent in the desert
Mm.
with a whole other bunch of people. And instead of running around in the desert, I just said, "Oh, I have a headache. I'm not going anywhere." I just stayed in a tent and had fun, and like was reading and playing the guitar with my friends who also dodged the the activity.
Mm.
So I think I think that was telling a lot of my um, future course in life.
So that was when you were like 15 or 16, that
I was
picture?
around 17. That
17?
17 was taken at 17.
And conscription in Israel happens at 18. So like what,
Exactly.
just 1 year later, you were expected
Exactly.
to join the,
Exactly.
so bring me to that because I know,
Exactly.
or I read that whether you tell me what's true about this, you refused to join and claimed you would hurt yourself.
Yeah.
So you would go, so
Yeah.
what happened? Because it sounds like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
were a Zionist and then suddenly
Yeah.
you're like
Yeah.
really putting your
Yeah.
foot down.
Yeah. Yeah. So, awareness grows with the experience and the
Okay.
material conditions around us. So I was recruited to the military just in the year of 2003, just as I finished high school, like 2 weeks after finishing high school. So not much time to prepare um, or do anything. And I did not want to go to the military that time. And I was expressing my discontent of going to the military.
Like to
But
your
I had,
parents or so, I'm sorry to
yeah, yeah,
interrupt, but
yeah,
like
yeah,
this is
yeah,
also
yeah,
foreign
yeah,
to
yeah.
me. Like, is
Yeah, yeah,
it,
yeah. I was telling my mother that I did not want to go to the
yeah.
military, but there was nothing. I mean, I had no tools and no support, and internet was very at its early beginning, so there was no resources. Today, there are like somebody who wants to read of how to dodge the military. Resources are available, so the knowledge did not exist, and I was in a very like highly recruited, motivated, like highly brainwashed society, you can say. So there was nobody to turn to. And although I expressed my lack of will to participate in that, everybody told me it's going to be okay, and it's just going to be okay. And I was recruited, so I was basically put on a bus
Hmm.
and was driven to the central recruiting base in Israel. Um, and I remember just the like 2 nights before I was like watching the musical Hair. And I remember feeling exactly like the protagonist of the film who has been put on a plane to Vietnam, and he has nothing to do with it, has nothing he can do against it. It's like it's like a river flowing to a sea, right? And the river cannot stop. The river cannot ask why or to do anything about it. So I just had to go along. And I also was extremely um, willing to leave my home. I was ready to leave. I did not want to stay, and I had great curiosity of the world outside of Haifa, which I found to be very provincial and not very stimulating. So I just wanted to go. I wanted to leave and to find my own freedom. So it was also a way of doing that just by joining the military. But once I got there, I realized that there is no choice but to find a way out because it was even worse than the pre-military camp. We had to wake up in 5 in the morning, and which is not something that fared well with me. So basically, I was a hedonist. You can say I was really spoiled, extremely spoiled. And that kind of hedonism protected me from
Yeah,
the,
I
yeah,
I just wanted to point out so far in that story you haven't, and I'm curious about this, the brainwashing. You haven't like mentioned the moral aspect of, oh, you're gonna go be tasked to fight and shoot and
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Palestinians. Like
yeah,
that's
yeah,
you're still
yeah,
sort of just thinking like this is just really uncomfortable and like I don't like
yeah,
mud.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There were no, like, there was none of that. I
Yeah.
was
Interesting.
not, there was none of that. I had no awareness or no thought of the kind of moral depravity
Hmm.
of the whole situation. I was very uncomfortable of holding a gun, although I was photographed with one, but I was highly uncomfortable with that.
Hmm.
Um, but I did it anyhow. I did it anyhow. But there was like not, there was a sense of discomfort, but nothing of anything of no consideration of what it means or anything because I had no awareness of
Hmm.
that. I grew up thinking that we are God chosen people and we were promised this land and it is, and we must do everything to defend it. So I was very much enmeshed within the hegemonic ideology of the time, and I was really a profound product of that. But I did have, but as I said, I was a hedonist, and I was interested in poetry and playing the guitar and going to the beach and being with my boyfriend and not having a commander barking commands in my ear and not waking up in the middle of the morning, in the middle of the night actually, and starting running around for no purpose or fulfilling commands that makes absolutely no sense, or doing like manual labor with absolutely no sense. So I was very self-centered, but luckily it really protected me from being being a soldier for the next 2 years. And so basically there was a certain point where I just cracked down and I said I cannot do that anymore. I think I was assigned to be like they assume I had some kind of responsibility of counting all the soldiers to see that everybody are present. And I was really uninterested in doing that. And I really suffered from it was really tenacious. It was like really a task that I found to be extremely annoying. And so I just like dropped everything and told them I want to see a mental health officer, something of that kind. They call it, yeah, something of that kind. And then I threatened suicide. I basically threatened suicide. And it worked. Back then it worked. Now it's not possible to do that anymore.
No.
Now nobody would ever consider doing that today, I believe. So whether that was a conscientious objection to the military, I don't know. If it was politically or ideologically driven, absolutely not. But nonetheless, not wanting to participate in the whole military endeavor is something of great. It's an anomaly, basically.
So, okay, so then you get out of it works, and they say, "Go home. You're dismissed. Here's the note, whatever."
Yeah.
But so when did the crumbling or the first instances of maybe the Zionist ideology start to show up for you? Was it connected with the little bit you saw of, I don't know, they call it basic training in America. I don't know what that level is called. Was it connected to your experience there of maybe this layer of militarism that was rather strange? Or when did Zionism start to crack for you?
Yeah, so I think not being fully brainwashed and indoctrinated in the military really helped my ability to maintain some kind of still flexibility. Because what happened is that people go to the military and they've been ideologically driven before that, but being sleep deprived and being like physically abused in the military and being punished with all kinds of sadistic means really solidify their political beliefs, because none of them can complete 3 years of so-called military service and say, "Oh, I was an idiot for doing that."
Right.
No, they don't. They're in a state of a cognitive dissonance, and so they are even more enmeshed within their political beliefs.
Yeah.
And that is something I was spared of. I didn't have to go through. I did not have that cognitive dissonance happening within me, and it's still the best decision I've taken in my life not to be in the military.
Okay, so this is where I'm breaking in about the cognitive dissonance thing. I didn't want to take up too much time with Stav in the live interview, but she mentioned the term. So before I dive back into her story and let her continue, I would just want to take a moment to really break this apart. So Cognitive dissonance. This was first discovered by a psychologist who I mentioned, Leon Festinger, and it's really crucial to understanding human behavior, in my opinion. And it ties directly into everything from military training, like Stav is about to talk about, to consumer decisions and even political stances. So I want to walk you through the original experiment that Festinger conducted to sort of start it off. I might get some of the details wrong here, but I'm going to try. I think it's really important. So this is the way it worked. Festinger, on his college campus, invited students who wanted to participate in a psychological experiment, they didn't know what they were going to be doing, to come to his lab sort of one by one. So he selected them. And the way it kind of worked was someone would be waiting, they would get called in, and then they would be presented with what he had set up in front of them, which was like a wooden pegboard. Just imagine a square wooden pegboard with a whole bunch of wooden cylinders on it. And he told them, thanked them for being a part of this study, and told them the task at hand first was to start in the top corner and turn the wooden peg about a quarter turn, like counterclockwise, and do each one by one, in all the rows, and then go back and do it the other way, quarter turn back the other way, and then again and again for about an hour. So it was designed to be basically like the most boring, tedious, pointless task ever. But anyway, he says, all right, go ahead, and starts the clock. So of course these students are probably thinking like, okay, what's this about? They trudge through kind of the whole hour, half hour without any conversation, and then the stopwatch goes off. And then there's sort of three variations to keep in mind with this group. So for the first group, you could think of it sort of as the control group. They do this wooden pegboard experiment, and then they're asked some simple questions basically about like how much you enjoyed it, would you recommend it, how much scientific value did it have, that kind of stuff. And you can imagine across the board, it's like, hated it, 0 out of 5 stars, this was super boring. There's a small bump for finding it maybe scientifically relevant, because maybe they assume it's so boring that it must mean something to someone, but basically just like, this was so boring, get me out of here, this was a waste of my day. Okay, that's one group. Another group sort of works the same way. They come in, just again, one student does the very boring pegboard experiment, and then the timer goes off, and then the experimenter says, okay, well, thanks for participating. Now, we have another student waiting outside who's going to come in and do what you just did as part of the experiment, and we usually have someone from the lab, someone from our team is usually sitting with them to kind of prepare them for what they're going to do and tell them how fun it's going to be and how interesting it is and how exciting it's going to be. But they didn't show up today. Do you mind helping out and doing this for us? We'll give you $20. And this was in the 50s, so with inflation, think more like $300 or something like that. And some people said no, some of the students, but many of the students who were students and needed the money said, like, of course, sure. So they would go and go out to the next student and tell them how wonderful it was going to be, how exciting it was going to be, how interesting it was going to be. And then after doing that, maybe for 3 or 4 students, the lab worker, Festinger's psychologist team would go out and say, okay, thanks, you can go home, our guy showed up. But before you do, can you answer these questions? And it's the same questions as before. So, how much did you enjoy it? Would you recommend it? How much scientific value did it have? And for that group, you still pretty much get like, yeah, I didn't enjoy it like at all. There's a small bump, but it's still like 1 star out of 5, basically. I didn't enjoy it at all. It was no good, even though they just told all these students that they enjoyed it, but $300 or $300, like they did what they got to do. And then the last group, and this is really where the discovery happens, the last group starts the same way. So they come in, do the pegboard, it's very boring. They're told, hey, our prep guy didn't come in today. Do you mind going out and telling the next student that it's going to be really wonderful and really interesting and how enjoyable it's going to be? We'll offer you $1. I think it may have been $5 at the time, but think like $10 or something. And so, obviously a few more of this groups they know right off the bat, but plenty of them still do it. They think about it for a bit and they're like, sure, well, I'll do that. And then they're out in the waiting room and they're telling the next students like, hey, it's going to be really interesting and this thing's really fun and enjoyable and blah, blah, blah. Again, 3 or 4 students go by. Festinger goes out and says, oh, our guy showed up. You can go home. Before you do, we have a few questions. Same questions as before. Fill the survey out. How much did you enjoy it? How much did you find it, scientifically valuable? Would you recommend it? Kind of stuff. And this group, suddenly how much they enjoyed it is like off the charts. It's like 4 stars, 5 stars, like this was really great. And you could replicate this kind of study over and over again. And so what Festinger surmised and hypothesized in his theory in this book he wrote was that what's happening with this group is something like this. So he wrote this theory of cognitive dissonance, where cognitive dissonance is a emotional feeling. It's an actual feeling, like hunger, or thirst, or it's something really uncomfortable. And what it is when two ideas are really clashing in your head. And this one might be something like, I'm a good person. Most people have the gear in their head that says I'm a good person, and lying is wrong. Good people don't lie, but I'm lying, and so there's a clash there, right? And the important thing to keep in mind about cognitive dissonance is that whenever ideas are clashing in our head, we can't live in that state very long. Our brains, our minds are designed to try to resolve this cognitive dissonance somehow. It's an actual kind of unbearable state of being to be in that state of cognitive dissonance. So you get to work, and most of this is very quick and subconscious, of course, but your brain gets to work in trying to resolve and finding an escape for this gear jam. You can think of like a printer jam that you have to fix. And so let's go to like the $100 group or whatever, the $500 group was offered a lot of money. For them, it's fairly easy. It's like, well, these things clashed. Good people don't lie. I lied. But hey, money is money. I need money to survive. I'm hungry. You could think of these things as justifications. You could even say some of this group would be like, I'm going to give 20% of that, $100 or whatever to charity, and I'm actually, going to equal this out somehow, Robin Hood style. I think most people are pretty familiar with this type of escape from cognitive dissonance. In a capitalist society, this happens just kind of all of the time. But what he surmised with that other group, which is why they could still say, I knew I was lying, but I did it for the money. It's like a used car salesman basically saying, well, I knew I was selling a crummy used car, but hey, that was a lot of money, and this is the way the system works. You could also just, as a note, sort of refer to maybe some of the libertarian arguments or the Milton Friedman arguments about general libertarianism, or Steven Pinker that, hey, this is maybe greedy that I'm taking the money, but the system is kind of all working out in an, Ayn Rand style libertarianism that's producing some good results, Fountainhead style or something. All of these things are at play there for the $100 group. But the really interesting discovery was that other group, right? So why did they all suddenly say, I actually loved this pegboard thing. This was actually really interesting. And I'll link to some of the original interviews. They're sort of interesting, back from the 50s when he conducted these. And what he surmised was, the gears clash. I'm a good person. Good people don't lie. I'm lying. And then maybe for a minute, your brain started to very quickly wonder, well, I got paid, but it wasn't very much money. And so, can you say good people lie for $1 million? Well, some people can start to do this, but can you say good people lie for $5? Well, so it just wasn't enough. And he called this the insufficient reward. And so this was sort of the insufficient reward group. And for them, the way out of cognitive dissonance is really tricky because you kind of can't point to the money that you were offered. So they found themselves sort of stuck of, why did I do what I did? And the way out of it, actually, which is very creepy in some ways, is our brains have this ability to be like, I know you actually didn't lie. The gear is actually going this way. You actually really enjoyed it. So you sort of revise even the way you thought about something you are participating in or participated in the past. What Festinger really discovered here was sort of revolutionary in a way, because sort of the thesis is something that, like, when we can't justify our actions externally, like maybe the $100 group can do, our brains will do an internal sort of work to change our own beliefs and reduce discomfort. And this just happens all the time in everyday life. Now, why is this idea so critical? Cognitive dissonance is not just some abstract philosophical notion. It's a visceral emotional state, almost like pain or hunger. And it demands a resolution. Our brains are incredibly adept at this kind of self-deception to alleviate it. This can help explain how powerful institutions like the IDF or military group maintain the loyalty of their members, or any ideology really. Let's take something like the IDF basic training that we're about to talk about here with Stav. Imagine a young recruit who has grown up with certain moral beliefs, who suddenly finds themselves in situations that challenge those beliefs. The psychological discomfort they feel could be intense, so their brain might just get to work over time to resolve the dissonance by shifting their beliefs to justify their actions. It's not that someone needs to explicitly brainwash them. The brain will do all the work for them to maintain the internal coherence. Nobody wants to believe that they were a cheap sellout. If you get offered $1 million to go do something that is kind of wrong, $1 million is not enough for your integrity. And I believe that there is this power in human integrity, that there's no price, even though we think everybody has a price. Deep down, we know there's not a price. And so you're the one who actually gets to work saying you actually didn't do it. It was for a righteous cause or a good cause. And it's a powerful, powerful thing inside all of us. This really alludes to someone like Hannah Arendt, who talked about the banality of evil. This was the kind of process she was talking about. Because what's so creepy about some of this process, and all of us have this, again, I'm not trying to cast this on anybody, when you look back upon your behavior of things maybe that you used to do that you now think are maybe morally objectionable or whatever it is, and you remember maybe how it felt in the moment of doing those things, honestly, it really feels like almost nothing. You have to kind of train yourself to pay attention to these very quick sparks of something like cognitive dissonance. Maybe one day in the distant future, if we get ourselves off of something like oil, people will ask, what did it feel like to put that oil in your car, knowing all of the things that it was contributing to in such an awful way? And remember that feeling right now. Probably feels like almost nothing. And you could say, well, I had no choice and that's why it felt like nothing. But that really is the crucial point that I want to make, is I want everybody, this is my main pitch, to try to begin to listen to their own cognitive dissonance, because I absolutely agree there are situations where you do not, you can with your integrity intact say, I didn't have a choice. Do you have a choice to boycott oil right now? Maybe, and that's very contextual depending on where you are and how you could do it. But if you're telling me right now watching this, I like what you're saying, but that's ridiculous. It's unrealistic, and you're asking too much of me. There's no way I can boycott petroleum products right now, even though I know they do this harmful thing. Great, agreed. With your integrity intact, you can say that, and I agree. But what you have discovered there by saying that is not some sort of moral clarity and right decision in that moment. What you have discovered is a political nightmare that we need to solve on all issues. We should never find ourselves with our integrity intact saying, I had no choice but to violate this. And that's my sort of crucial point that I want to emphasize in all of this cognitive dissonance understanding. And this understanding should also change the way that we see influence in society generally, or something like journalism or politicians. When we say, they're being bought by interest groups or the Israel lobby or anything else, I think what we're overlooking is this internal mechanism. Yes, there's definitely corruption and direct influence, but more often than not, people genuinely convince themselves that what they're saying or doing is the right thing, the righteous thing, just like that $1 group. Nobody had to tell her to say that. She did it on her own. So I think Dana Bash is getting bought and sold by the Israeli lobby. You could say it that way, but this is what I'm talking about, is that she will be doing that work. That if those gears are going off in her head when she sees the images of what she is reporting on and supporting, which I do think they are, although many people have gotten very good at smothering the small voice in their mind, this is the work that does it. No one needs to tell her not to. It's that she doesn't want to be, there's no price for genocide, so it's not genocide. There's no price for ethnic cleansing, so it's not ethnic cleansing. That's the mechanism in all of us. And again, I want to universalize these concepts. If you've been following, my work is not about at all saying that there's some sort of unique psychological or philosophical problem that we're facing at the moment. This is universal stuff that we've always been facing. And if this moment is going to be worth anything, like all of them, it's going to be that we have to learn from it, since we consistently always fail to learn from the past moments. And this is a moment to really learn. So now that I've given you this, I think you'll start seeing it everywhere, including in your own behaviors. Really just no avoiding Festinger's cognitive dissonance. But my crucial point, just to underline it again, is that you may say you have no choice. And with your integrity intact, That's your evaluation to handle, and mine within my own self. That's you're the only one who can really know that. When that's intact, and you could say, I have no choice, that is not the end of the conversation. And it is not the end of a moral journey. It's the beginning of one, and it's the discovery of a political problem. And if you don't do that, you are participating in what Sartre called self-deception. I'll just read his quote here because he called it bad faith. And he said, bad faith is the denial of the freedom to escape the anxiety that comes with freedom and responsibility. And it's a great quote and it's a great thought because it admits how awful cognitive dissonance is. It's anxiety, it's tense, we're the moral animal that can think and can choose and try to change situations, even though our brains are working against us to tell us we have no choice, which of course is the best way out of cognitive dissonance. So as just an example of that, if Festinger and other people have done this experiment, if Festinger didn't offer you any money but just said you have to go do this thing, almost every student does it because they think it's just part of the experiment. You have to go tell these people out there that you really enjoyed it and you really did this kind of thing, or you're just fully on forced to do it. That's the easiest way for people to fall in line. So it's very tempting for us to decide we have no choice, to tell ourselves we have no choice, and to tell ourselves that we are going to make the best decision possible within all of these limited choices. But we should listen to people like Sartre, we should lean on people like Festinger, and then to get back to Stav's story, even in a place where she maybe had very limited choices, she did find a way to maybe escape this. But the reason she went into this is she kind of got to the lab and ran away, where many, many people, including in her friend group that she'll tell you about, of course, didn't and participated in basic training. And once you start the process of violating your integrity, even on small scales, it gets much easier to do it and much, much more difficult to revise later on. As just, for example, just one more time with Festinger, if the person who got the $1 offer and then told you really how much they loved this pegboard game, and after thinking about it more, they decided it was really, really interesting. Again, they weren't lying. They were telling these students the truth. And you kind of call their bluff and you say, oh, cool, do you want to take the pegboard home? And you can play with it anytime you want. In that moment, they would say, yes, oh, of course I'll take it home. But then maybe if you put a camera and spied on them and you counted how many times they used the game just on their own, it's probably almost nothing. And if that truth is revealed to them, I'm sure they'll come up with some excuse, but maybe that one's not a major infraction, being like, you know what, I kind of lied for $5 and it was kind of crummy, it was a really cheap thing. But scale that up to doing much, much deeper and bigger moral violations than simply lying to another classmate about a pegboard game. And it becomes much, much harder to revise and face the truth that maybe you violated your integrity for a very, very low price. And of course, when it comes to Israel at the moment and many other things in the world, but apartheid states and genocides and these massive, massive moral violations, it is a tall task for many people to maybe revise and admit maybe what they really participated in. And what's becoming increasingly clear, I think, is that many of us feel like we're in the $1 group where the rewards of convincing ourselves that this kind of violence in the world is somehow necessary to uphold our freedoms that they tell us and our things and some sort of capitalism, it's all beginning to feel like a bit of an insufficient reward. And I hope more of us are feeling the gears in our brains grinding there. So that's my take on cognitive dissonance. I have obviously much more to say about it, but I'm going to get back to Stab's amazing story. Thanks.
I can't recall having friends with whom I remain in contact that underwent the same path. Most of them were, all of them were recruited to the military, and our paths has just departed. I had one good friend who was recruited to the air military force, and she just cut ties with me once I left the military. So there were significant social implications of not having to serve, to be a soldier. So I cannot really answer that because I don't have any friends
Yeah.
remaining from that era, but I think they also paid
Yeah.
significant prices for their decisions, especially women in the military. There are, I think most of them, I would say like 1 out of 1 are sexually abused in
Mm.
some way. And this, or even raped, if it's okay to say it on YouTube, but that's the reality. But like, um, and it's not been spoken, but I think not having to serve the military has also saved me a huge trauma
Yeah.
that might have happened because women are um, in the military. There is this ethos, again, the liberal feminism ethos that women can do just everything just like men. But in reality, they are used as sexual objects in the military. And it's something yeah, I did not have to undergo. So I think most of the people I grew up with integrated into the hyper-capitalist system, taking leading positions, just like as I was supposed to do, taking leading positions in society, in the market, in high tech, um, in governance, and some of them in the military. I also like after that, going to the university, I was taking a taking a course in literature. One of the students in that course was Daniel Hagari, which is the nowadays the Israeli Offenses Force public speaker, military speaker. So that is the kind of people I went
Yeah.
to school with and university with, and I'm very happy that I did not become one of them. Because if that was the case, I was to become to myself a region of destitution. I would be completely crushed if that would be the case. And um, I mean, I was supposed to be an officer, I could also marry an officer. That was good enough, but luckily none of that has happened. And so, not by not going to the military, I was able to maintain some kind of freedom for myself. And yeah, so
Yeah. All right. Well, then, so
yeah.
take it forward then to when you started to maybe see the Israel project for what you insist that it now is.
Yeah, so I was very privileged to gain education, higher education, and go to the university. I went to Tel Aviv University, or we should call it Sheikh Munis University after the village it was built on, Palestinian village it was built on. And it was a mixture of circumstances. There was nothing really, no actual event or turning point that kind of changed my mind, but it was rather a gradual process where I realized different things. But just by gaining education, I was able to come to get familiar with terms such as colonialism, which I had known nothing about, and terms such as apartheid. And also, while I was on campus, I was exposed to a really horrific event that happened in the West Bank, where a a young Palestinian girl, was shot by the military, by the Israeli force on her way to school. And that really shocked the campus. And it was shocking not only because she was killed, but the soldiers who killed her went and they went they performed a process, a protocol that is called execution after death. Namely, they had to stab her and verify that she is actually dying. And this is something, by the way, that Israel has inherited from the British, like many other oppressive practices, such as administrative detention. and other sadistic means of that sort. So that really shocked the campus, and there was like wide mobilization to go and participate in the weekly demonstrations in the West Bank. And I joined that. I joined the popular committee of the West Bank, and I went to protest against the military, the Israeli military in the West Bank, in villages of Bil'in and Ne'ilin, and later on also Nabi Saleh. But that was much later on. So that was the first time I actually stood against the Israeli military, and that was really shocking because I've seen the kind of brutality they practiced, and they also practiced that against us demonstrators who were privileged Israeli Jews.
Was that hard for you to stand up against them at that point? Do you remember this being an emotional decision, or?
I think I was really shocked. I was really shocked to see the brutality firsthand, and that kind of shattered the paradigm of Israel as a democracy, defending its country and all kinds of thought-terminating cliches of that sort. So, and it was just not just that, but I also met radical professors in the time. So one of whom was Professor Shlomo Zand, and I became very close with Shlomo. And Shlomo taught me everything I know basically on historical analysis and intellectual history and conceptual history. And he has contributed a great deal of my education. Shlomo comes from a communist background, and he was one of the few members of the Matzpen group, who was a radical leftist group in the 1970s, also the first group to have stand against the occupation. So I was his disciple, you can say, and I was also later on I became his teaching assistant, and I was the editor of his book, The Invention of the Jewish People.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I contributed to the editing of that book, which later became a bestseller. And although today I have many points of disagreement with Shlomo, for example, Shlomo does not support the right of return, which is something I see as the number one principle of being an ally of Palestinians. And we do not see eye to eye on every term, but he has provided me with the body of the majority of my historical education and ability to analyze things on the historical level. And he also taught me about colonialism, and so this is all this, the combination of all these circumstances have led me to understand of the wider context in which I was living, understanding that Israel is a product of colonialism.
Mm-hmm.
And still, when I was in Tel Aviv University, I still believed in coexistence, and I was still very much on the liberal side. But that has very quickly changed when I've moved to Berlin.
And how did that, I guess I'm losing track of your age and the time there, but how does that intersect with some of the Intifada violence that was coming close to you? I'm sure the conversation was ramping up.
Yeah. So it was, So for example, when I was in high school, in the last year of high school, 2003, there was a suicide bombing happening in Haifa, and I lost a classmate. And that created a massive shock within the whole group of in my peer group. Her name was Liz Katzman. She was 17 when she died, when she was murdered. And many people among my peers have decided to avenge her death.
Yeah.
And she was beautiful. She was just an amazing individual, and it was a shock. And that kind of has driven my peers into combatant roles in the military, and there was a kind of ritual where for each Arab Palestinians they killed, they marked a hole in their belt. So there was a kind of ritualistic performance of relating to her death and what has happened throughout the second Intifada. And it was scary. I gotta tell you, like during the time, I basically was trying to avoid going on buses. I'm still very much reluctant to go on big public events, on public transportation, and I'm still like my mind is still scarred from that. And every time I go on the train, I have to remind myself that it's very unlikely that there's going to be a suicide bomber here. But it's something that we don't have control over because the mind was shaped during that time. Nonetheless, today, with my reasonable capacities, I can understand the overall struggle against apartheid and occupation. And I understand people who are turning to violent means. I can understand. It's not for me to judge or justify or not justify or to cast any judgment on that. But I can definitely understand the people who's been deprived of their livelihood, of their lives, of their future, of anything, of their dignity, and that turned into violent practices against the occupier.
Yeah.
Which is by the way a right that it was enshrined by the UN for natives to resist by every mean, including violent means.
Yeah. Yeah. So what you just said there is obviously like the explosive touch point in the Western culture. I grew up in America, and the big bad T word of terrorism has become the savage of our time, or the uncivilized of our time, or the barbarian of our time. And you very delicately just tiptoed through the morality of it, which is the same way I try as well. If people see a short essay I did called "Do You Condemn Hamas?" and my answer to it, I think it's very similar to kind of the way you did it. I go into a more philosophy and psyche undertow with it as well. But again, just to because you've lived through this, you're in Shlomo Sand's class at the time that this is all happening, right? I've read Shlomo's book. I read recently How I Stopped Being a Jew, which was, I think, also a fantastic essay he did. What is it like in a classroom like that, the day after your classmate Liz gets killed? Because it's kind of easy for us to intellectualize about history and all these things, but the emotions must be running high. I interviewed Miko Peled way at the beginning of when I started this series, and his, as like unbelievable as this is for people to sort of comprehend, his first moment really stepping out into from his Zionist shell in many ways was when his sister's daughter, so his nephew, was killed in a suicide bombing. And his experience was like, this sounds crass to some people, but it's like, what did we do to them to make them so angry? And like that question, of course, is out of bounds in American culture, but it's the question that needs to be asked. I'm just curious, what is it like on a college campus the day after that happens to maybe even more delicately have to tiptoe those conversations?
I mean, that event happened in 2003, and my encounter with Shlomo happened a bit later on.
Gotcha.
But nonetheless, I don't know, Shlomo was provided intellectual guidance through all of that, and kind of always taught us to think of the power relations.
Yeah.
And he managed to put things in historical context.
Right.
So if you think things on that level, understanding that people who turn to violent means are a part of a wider struggle, just like the one that happened in Algiers against the French. And he was able to conceptualize that. And he had like one of his main courses was on history of film, where the Battle on Algiers was one of the main, the most prominent films he used to show us. And when we were watching that film, we understood that we were the French. And we understood why Palestinians are taking the means, why they engage the means which they engage. And he's managed to shade a whole completely different light, counter-hegemonic on things. It was him and other radical professors, not just him, but he managed to conceptualize and communicate those truths in a very appealing way. And also, his main contribution was showing us students that the so-called Jewish nationalism, which is not more than supremacy, white supremacy, you can say, or just a form of racial supremacism, is not unique in history. Right. It is in fact just another romantic national movement that was built with the tools shared by other nationalist movements, such as the German nationalism, French nationalism. They all imagined themselves to have some kind of glorious past. They all imagined themselves to have the cultural unit overlapping with the kind of overlapping of culture and nationalism, which is completely false. And he was able to show us the historical process by which this mechanism were built. Because here also, like, when probably we're going to speak about Germany, but also here, German identity was not organically, has not risen on an organic matter. It had to be forced from above. There was like mass processes of unification and standardization of language and identity. So identity had to be built. It had to be constructed. And this was also a major shift, understanding that we are not unique as we were taught to think.
Yeah, I think that's a hugely important point. I've been trying to make it a lot. Even on the other side, where people want to because we're living through it, and maybe because it's live streamed and everything, we're seeing the horrors in a new way. People want to elevate what's happening in Gaza and beyond now as a unique evil in history, and certainly the power of the bombs are getting stronger. But as I keep, it's Mark Twain that said history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And I keep trying to show them the rhymes of this thing in the past. So maybe I'll even put it on the screen, because as you were talking there, you've probably heard or seen a lot of American intellectuals using the Nat Turner analogy, which I think fits, and I've used it as well. But and I won't go through the whole story again here, but slave revolt in Virginia that was quite brutal. Also had its own religious justifications, like we always hear. Killing babies, killing kids. They went into a classroom, I think, and killed 12 students and the teacher. It was a rampage, an angry rampage. We would call them terrorists today, but it was a slave revolt. And through the the moral lens of history, maybe we can see it as a just cause, and so we have a different moral lens on it. But just as an example, I've collected a ton of newspapers from that time covering that event. And most of them, of course, the word terrorist wasn't used at the time, but savage and all kinds of things. And this was actually after Haiti had their successful slave revolution. And all of them were fear-mongering of, like, remember what happened in Haiti, this could happen to you. But there was one newspaper, which would have been the example of sort of like your Shlomo Sand example, called The Liberator, which was in Boston, and it was one of the very, very few dedicated to emancipation newspapers, and they of course covered it, but they tiptoe very delicately through the language as well, as to not glorify or justify or morally accept, but and I'm sure they got a lot of shit, just the way that people like you and I always do when this kind of thing happens and we try to contextualize it. They tried to contextualize with a little foresight how that event should highlight the inhumanity, and I'll find the words and put them on the screen. But it was a really familiar passage to read for people like you and I now. This has been happening forever, and it's the most difficult thing. But yeah, so anyway, you go on with your story because this is great.
I think I think that is a radical mode of thinking in itself, because nothing comes of nothing, right? Is one of the major axioms of Greek philosophy. Nothing comes of nothing.
I should mention that Stav is also is an expert in Plato. You teach a lot of the classics, so it's Plato and Socrates, and I've read her writing. So yeah,
I'm not proficient in Greek, but I do teach Plato, Aristotle.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to go on because I've read your writing and it's great, and a lot of the Stoicism stuff. So yeah, so sorry to interrupt, but go on.
Yeah. So ex nihilo nihilo fit. Nothing comes of nothing. So we have to understand the continuity in history. And of course, when somebody performs a great act of violence, we have to ask ourselves, why is that person was willing to act in such manner? Of course, that kind of thought process is being immediately shut down, immediately stopped, using other thought-terminating cliches that are so prominent in discourse. And it is up to us to kind of understand the historical continuity and as Shlomo taught us, the wider process, historical process by which people in the decolonial world have started to rebel against their colonial masters. And the same way goes when it comes to the struggle against slavery happening in the US. And I'll tell you more about that, because when we were sentenced in court, we started singing the song
We Shall Overcome.
The song of John Brown's Body. So basically the judge was rendering his sentence and we were hymning like without the guards. We were like, John Brown's body lying molding in the grave, right?
Yeah.
But his spirit marches on.
Yeah. We'll get. I don't want to spill the beans because we're not. Everyone's like, you got arrested. Yeah, it happened. But before then, I'm actually curious now of because this topic that we're on of the importance, but then also I think emotional difficulty and linguistic tightrope walking that we have to do in the moment of pain. I mean, on October 8th, you and I may have been trying to make these arguments to a degree, but that is a minefield that you're going to step on something. But to stay on it, just I'm curious, because we sort of left them behind in the early part of your story. Did your parents talk to you at this point? Was this an open conversation with you bringing these things up? I mean, because they were the early 1948, and you're basically saying, hey, like, you're the colonizers here. You're the French in that movie. You know what I mean? And that's a really, really thin tightrope. I think there's many of us out here probably even listening who have failed to walk it and have severed ties.
Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard. It's really hard, but I think I'm not the only one struggling with those dilemmas.
I'm getting a little emotional now too, because people who listen to me, my relationship with my mother has been strained my entire life because of this. She's come a long way, by the way. I'm gonna just give a little update that, like, maybe she'll see this and get mad, but I actually think she's going to appear on a show with me at some point one day. She was in the very first one that I've been mentioning her since the beginning. She wasn't on camera, but that, like, and she's an American Jew who got a different level of the indoctrination that you had. But seeing, when I said, like, you are the French in this story, like that. So I'm curious how your experience went and it's still going, because I'm sorry that as far as I understand it, your tightrope snapped, or you decided to jump off it because you just couldn't cross it. But how, like, back in 2003 when Obama was going off, or a little later with Shlomo or whatever it is, are you telling your parents, who are probably outraged or in mourning or saying we need to build a wall or whatever, and you're saying, no, that must be tough?
It's really hard because your family our family also know they know us and they can like push triggers. So it's never
Yeah.
boy they do, boy they
Check.
can. And
Yeah.
and so it's never a discussion on really equal terms. And it's never a discussion that can be held in a calm, relaxed way. There's always like emotion. There is no detachment from the topic where you can engage your rational capacity and and just have a discussion. But it is highly emotional. I was at the beginning, I was trying to avoid the topic or hide my
Mm-hmm.
engagement. I definitely did not tell them that I'm going to the West Bank. I mean, it's like a parent's interest is to protect and shield their child, and telling them that I went to such extreme um, ex experiences was not something that was ever tangible or but they did sometimes they have seen things on the media and I was just avoiding the topic. At a certain point, I stopped becoming apologetic
Mm-hmm.
about my political activity. I grew up. I'm now pushing 40.
Yeah.
So I understand where I stand. I know who I am, and I'm not apologetic about my political activities, and I don't need to account. I don't owe nobody an account um, of what I do. And I see, I mean, they are also a product of their society, of their time and historical context. And I think it's futile to try and change them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not my interest. I'm also not trying to convince or change anybody. My goal is to change the power relation between the oppressor and the oppressed. I'm not interested in the opinions of the oppressors. Their opinions are irrelevant to the struggle. And so I've kind of changed the mindset. Of course, it's very hard on the emotional level, but it's just like the opinion, what the white masters in South Africa thought and their mindset had nothing to do with overturning the power relations
Yeah.
between white and blacks. And the same goes to the to Israeli, to the context of his in Israel, to the Israeli context.
Can I push
Yeah.
back on that a little bit? But
Yeah.
and the only thing is, and maybe this is because I want to defend my personal project, but even in South Africa, the straw that broke the camel's back of that apartheid was America joining the boycott. So I'm
Yeah.
an American, and my mom's an American, and I've always, I mean, in my very first essay, I totally hear what you're saying, especially on the ground in Israel with the IDF and like the day to day,
Yeah.
but the whole world now, and I'm of course I'm skipping way ahead, but the whole world now has seemingly turned the tide against Israel even in American public opinion, it's changing quite a bit. And everyone who's feeling hopeless because it's like, well, statement after statement and UN condemnation after UN condemnation and this and that, nothing seems to change on the ground. They're right to be cynical, but the one variable we haven't seen is what happens to the power dynamic you're talking about when when the American support really does face a dramatic threat. And I think there's a ton of reasons why we haven't seen that threat materialize. And of course, Kamala Harris nor Trump represent that that's going to change anytime soon. But and maybe because I grew up in it, the American Jew holds a lever over this power dynamic that it has been cowardly afraid to pull since I was born. And I'm part of that cowardness. When you're talking about the silence and avoiding it, it was 20 years of me not talking about it and keeping it to myself simply because it was ruining the
Yeah.
relationship between my mother and I, which
Yeah.
is selfish.
Yeah.
I should have grown up and grown a pair before that. But I really didn't until October 7th, and I regret that. But I contend, I hear what you're saying there totally, and we'll continue with your story. I just wanted to flag a little bit, like,
Yeah.
you might be right on the ground, and your level of engagement is way more direct, and we're gonna get to like how you're trying to do that, which I completely admire. But I do think changing the opinion of the American Jew, which is changing on its own, but the old American Jew with a lot of money, is a lever that I would just desperately love to see pulled as fast as possible to see how it changes on the ground. That's just my pitch.
Yeah, 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 I understand.
It's not even a disagreement because I like I said, we're going to get to what you physically
Yeah,
do on the ground, and it is
yeah,
way
yeah,
more impactful than anybody
yeah.
else I know. So yeah.
I gotta like maybe I should have mentioned that my father was an artist and a graphic designer and a photographer, and he provided like services to the industries in the Haifa region where Elbit system is based, and he also was working with Elbit systems.
Okay. We've
So
mentioned Elbit now.
yeah,
Let's wait on it. Okay, so we don't get too much out of
yeah,
order because your story
yeah,
has a great narrative.
yeah,
But so let's
yeah.
first
It's
then go.
a bit eclectic.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's
So
really
sorry for
interesting. I didn't know
that.
that. So let's hold that one. But first, let's get to let's go to your because it sounds like we're getting somewhat close to it. Your first encounter with the law, as it were, with the Humboldt
Yeah.
University protest. Is that the first time you sort of like did something
No.
like that? And I'll show the video. Yeah.
Actually, the first time I was arrested was in 2010 in East Jerusalem,
Oh.
in Sheikh Jarrah, where a group of us, were trying to um, basically block the road in protest of settlements that were being set up in Sheikh Jarrah, and were basically robbing Palestinians, local Palestinians, of their property. And this is the first time I got arrested. And so that was a kind of prelude to of me getting to know the justice system more closely. Then soon after I immigrated, I left. It was in order to pursue higher education. I was about to embark on my PhD. I was aiming to study I studied French, in fact, and I was hoping to study where Professor Shlomo Zahn did his PhD, which is the École des Hautes Études in Paris, but I was rejected, and I had to pursue higher education using my plan B, which was Germany. So my presence here in Germany is a total coincidence. I never thought that I would speak German, and I had no intention of that. German culture did not have much of an appeal to me. But yet again, I was also very eager to leave the state of Israel because the racism and fascism were simply overwhelming during that time. The genocidal rhetoric was already there.
Yeah.
And there was also one event which was really scary, and that was the story of Anat Kam. Anat Kam was a student in one of the courses where I was assigned to be a teaching assistant, and she was a very astute and sharp tongue student. And we didn't hear from her for quite a long time. She basically disappeared. Make a long story short, she basically was put under a house arrest and under censorship, so nobody could know that she was under house arrest, and she got completely disconnected from the outside world because of a file that she transferred to an Haaretz journalist documenting crimes in the West Bank. And so she was able to document those instances while she was doing her military service. She basically copied those files and were able to leak those files to Haaretz newspaper, and that was a shock. That was also another shock to know that the state can basically make anybody disappear. You don't have to like physically make them disappear. You just have to get a censorship order and a house arrest, and that's it. And the person is buried alive. And that was another sign for me that it's time to go. And I just couldn't withstand being in that society. I did not, me loving life and like going swimming in the beach and enjoying the sun, everything became pale, knowing what's going on only 16 kilometers away from Tel Aviv, where people basically were held in a Bantustan kind of area. And so nothing was fun, nothing was life simply were drained out of their joy. And I just wanted to leave. I did not want to be a part of this society. Also during like 2010, there was like a mass campaign by Avigdor Lieberman, who is currently a politician, who is still a serving politician. And it says, a real Israeli does not dodge the military. And it was like huge. It was like billboards and buses and everything was there. And not that I really cared about being a true Israeli. I couldn't care less, but it was the overall atmosphere that was very hostile to anybody who did not show loyalty to the state, which I had absolutely not an ounce of loyalty to the state. So yeah, so I left basically and pursued higher education in Germany.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I think we could go to maybe the Humboldt University, but I'm curious, even though, just since again you lived this, it's so interesting. Is like, I'm hearing kind of in your story a sort of, you're mugged by the reality of history. Basically, you got the story of how Israel came to be without the mythology, and then it just became something that needed to be fought against. Was there any ounce of you during this time that you thought it could be reformed or saved somehow, or was the well of history so poisoned that you were like, this just has to go, or were you like, guys, wake up, learn the history, and share or whatever?
There was part of me that knew that the whole undertaking is legitimate, but still did not want to believe. Again, the cognitive dissonance, still did not want to believe that it is the case, and maybe there's some kind of redemption in the form of coexistence. So there was some still Zionist liberal tendencies within that phase, but that has quickly changed. And I think that who made the analytical distinction and still does it, I think, better than everybody else, better than any intellectual today, is my good comrade Ronnie Barkan, with whom I was sent to prison and with whom we also went to trial. We already have a long history of trial together.
Yeah.
So Ronnie makes a distinction. Like we tend to think, for example, he would explain it better, but we tend to think of individuals such as Itamar Ben-Gvir or Smotrich or the kind of the right wingers, the right signifiers in Israeli politics as the ultimate evil, and that they are the problem. They're the kind of very violent stream representing the kind of very brutal force. But he says, no, that's not the case. They're at least very honest about their politics. Going back to Zhibotinsky, who was very honest about his ends and the means to achieve those ends. Whereas liberal Zionists, they are the one who are rendering legitimacy to the enterprise because they are the one who speaks the rhetoric of peace and coexistence. Whereas they are the ultimate Zionists. They are the one who are obfuscating their mastership over the land in liberal terms. And in that sense, they are much worse and much more dangerous than the honest fascists. Because we can deal with the honest ones. We know how to combat them. But people such as Tzipi Livni, who is on Elbit board of trustees, and people like Israel's so-called president, Bougie Herzog, who is also like one of the signifiers of peace and coexistence. They are the worst of the worst, and they are the one who are being embraced and adopted by the West for their liberal rhetorics. Of course, they are very much supportive. I mean, them and their kind, perhaps not specifically, but they are the one who are embracing LGBTQ plus politics, and they are the one who would support women's rights and things like that, and such. They are being supported by the West, but whereas in fact they are the one preventing people from converting from Zionism, which is a supremacist, racist ideology that assign people to two categories, the Übermensch and the Untermensch. And they are the one rendering legitimacy to the undertaking. And they are the one who are actually preventing people from transferring from being a Zionist to a humanist.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly said. Like I said, I'm gonna keep coming back to that because I think that parallel is everywhere. It's just rather exaggerated in Israel at the moment. But I did in one of the essays I show Donald Trump's reaction getting asked about the killing of Jamal Khashoggi in Saudi Arabia and a potential arms deal that was on the table with Saudi Arabia for $110 billion versus the way Barack Obama was responding to a very similar question about a blogger who was jailed, Raif Badawi, and an arms deal for $115 billion. And their answers couldn't sound any more different. One gives you the eloquent, human rights rhetoric, blah, 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 and like we're going to try to put pressure. And the other one says, I'm going to give them the money. What do you think? It's $110 billion. And they both gave the money. So it's like, so nothing is different on the ground, but one, is digestible because he said the rhetoric. And so anyway, that's a point that I hit all the time. And obviously it's infuriating. But I think it's perfect for your point here too, because correct me if I'm wrong, I don't remember the name of the representative at Humboldt who you stood up and interrupted, because it sounds like she's one of these people, right? Like, what's her name?
Oh, yeah,
Avisa? I don't remember her name.
Aliza Lavi, I mean, she's just a small fish, you can say. She's absolutely nobody in politics. She was just a puppet, and nonetheless, she was a member of the Foreign and Security Committee in 2014. So she basically rendered her vote to bombard and engage a slaughter of the people of Gaza in 2014. So she raised her finger.
Yeah. But I just put her in that category because like she wrote a children's book about like great Jewish women, and like she does all the things that you know are acceptable to what, right. So I can put that up there. Yeah.
Exactly.
And she's in Yair Lapid's organization. So when people hear about, Bibi is the problem, who's the opposition, we're talking about.
Absolutely.
So anyway, so it's a perfect segue to where you were.
I think really people tend to focus on Netanyahu and other kind of right signifiers in Israeli politics, not understanding that those who are actually more violent, more dangerous, and more, you can say, genocidal, far more genocide. I mean, what we are seeing now in terms of genocide could have been much, much worse if Lapid was in power.
Interesting.
And this is in my view. And Lapid, I mean, I personally think he's an imbecile. Really, he is. He was trying to get his PhD without completing a high school diploma. So I think he's also on the substandard in terms of his intellectual aspirations, but that's just my view.
I don't know him well enough to comment, but I'll take your word for it.
No, it's beyond substandard.
Yeah.
But he's also a product of political nepotism, and his father actually, his father, Tommy Lapid, was participating in the most important debate in Israeli history, in Israeli apartheid history, in 92 with Professor Yeshayahu Leibovich. Professor Yeshayahu Leibovich claimed that there are Judo-Nazis in Israel, namely people with Nazi mentality. And he claimed that Israel maintained concentration camps where many thousands of Palestinians are being held without legal foundation. And Tommy Lapid was trying to challenge Yeshayahu Leibovich, one of the brightest intellectuals ever to have risen from the apartheid state. And Tommy Lapid, again, the father of Yair Lapid, was challenging him, asking him whether they are being gassed in those concentration camps, according to Leibovich. And Leibovich replies, "That is your future prophecy."
Jeez.
ובמצב הזה שבו אתה מקבל מהממשלה הזאת, שכבר הזכרתי שאתה קראת לה ממשלת המדינה היהודו-נאצית, כשאתה מקבל ממנה את הפרס הזה, האם אתה עדיין סבור, כפי שאמרת פה בתוכניתנו לפני זמן קצר, שזו מדינה בלתי דמוקרטית?
יש שני דברים בדבר. הדבר הראשון, שמאחר שאתה העלית אותו, אני צריך להתייחס אליו, אף שמעולם לא מצאתי לנחוץ להתייחס אליו. כאילו אני אמרתי מדינה נאצית. יהודו-נאצית. יהודו-נאצי, השתמשתי בו בקשר למנטליות מסוימת הקיימת בחוגים מסוימים. יש מנטליות יהודו-נאצית בחוגים מסוימים. זה היה המקרה האחד והיחיד שבו השתמש בביטוי יהודו-נאצי.
היית חוזר רק בך מהביטוי הזה לכבוד האווירה הנינוחה של הפרס?
המנטליות היהודו-נאצית בחוגים מסוימים קיימת ועומדת.
יהודים ששורפים ערבים להנאתם, כמה מיליוני ערבים, פרופסור ליבוביץ', נכון? חוגים מסוימים ששאיפתם היא להקים מחנות ריכוז ולשרוף בקרמטוריום ערבים.
ידוע לי שמדינת ישראל מחזיקה במחנות ריכוז הרבה אלפים ערבים.
ומדי פעם מכניסה אותם לתאי גזים ואחר כך שורפת אותם.
אני יודע שמדינת ישראל מחזיקה במחנות ריכוז הרבה אלפים ערבים.
ואחר כך שורפת אותם. ומכניסה אותם לתאי גזים. פרופסור ליבוביץ', אתה מאשים את
אני דיברתי עברית ברורה. אני יודע שמדינת ישראל מחזיקה במחנות ריכוז כמה אלפים ערבים.
ואחר כך שורפת אותם. ומכניסה אותם לתאי גזים.
זה נבואתך. זה נבואת העתיד שלך.
רבותיי, אני רוצה לבקש ממך, חנן פה.
That's pretty dark.
That is pretty dark, and
given the images that yes were
exactly.
there. Yeah, a friend had texted me just 2 days ago. Sorry to interrupt again. A friend had texted me, of course, with the burning bodies images. Like this is the gas chamber moment, and I couldn't agree more. It's worse in many ways.
Yeah. So that is the kind of line connecting the Lapid as the liberal signifiers, as which I see as one of the most acute problems, because they are the one who are being embraced by the West, and they also kind of carries the ethos of democracy, although we know that Israel has never been a democracy. Never been a democracy, and I have a lot to say about that. But just going back to the Humboldt affair. Aliza Levy was one of those liberal signifiers, and we basically came and disrupt her talk. It wasn't a talk, it was a propaganda event organized by the Deutsche Israelische Gesellschaft, basically the Zionist lobby. And Ronnie and I came, and Ronnie just waved at her face the Tilly and Falk report. The Tilly and Falk report, it was 2017, basically blaming Israel in the crime of apartheid. Crime of apartheid is on par with genocide, according to the Rome Statute. Okay, so we were basically challenging her to face the kind of crimes she's responsible for. And then Ronnie was escorted out of the hall, and then I came and I basically told her that you have blood on your hands, and how dare you show up here, and then I was punched in the face by one of the participants. So this evidence, this evidence was shown in court, although the court won't release that piece of information, although I have been pursuing that through my lawyers. It was documented by a journalist, a fascist journalist, and those footage, which are very harming to the Israeli lobby, has not been publicly released. Me being getting punched in the face, and then I was basically dragged out of court. And when I was outside of court, I basically knocked on the door, asking for the name and identification of the person who has just assaulted me. And in turn, I was taken to court. It is very common everywhere in the history of activism and the struggle. If you are being the victim, that you are most likely to be accused. Like if a policeman, like let's say, beat somebody up, it's very likely that person is going to be taken to court for assaulting the police. Just for being in physical contact with a police officer, one can be held to court, right? So that was the case. So I was basically taken to court for an attempted assault because I was punching the door.
Yeah, I read that. It sounded kind of insane. Like someone on the other side of the door is like, oh, the door is shaking or something. Yeah.
So there were two witnesses that came to testify, and they were just lying through their teeth and claiming that they had an adrenaline spike, which is tantamount to an assault. So frankly, I don't care. I'm not concerned with any of that. None of that concern me at all. But what was really significant and meaningful during that trial is the kind of learning process that I myself, and also Ronnie, perhaps it was more significant and meaningful to me to get exposed to the history of resistance in Germany. And that is a part of the kind of preparation we, and I specifically, underwent before going to trial and formulating my statements and so on. I learned a lot about the White Rose Underground, which is extremely significant in my intellectual history, which was also extremely important in our future action. Basically understanding that it's not only that we must bear the consequences for our actions, for participating in the struggle for equality, justice, and freedom in Palestine, but we have the moral duty to enact in such way, and that it is the imperative of our time to speak against apartheid. So the White Rose Underground has been extremely significant to my political education, and I'm very thankful for the whole Humboldt affair, because I've managed to read in the original language, having now the German skills to be able to relate to them, understanding their own intellectual background. So basically, the White Rose was an activist or a rebellious group during the Nazi era that basically distributed leaflets all across Germany, and specifically in Munich, where it was based. Very led by the Scholl brothers, by Hans and Sophie Scholl, who were the students or the disciples of Professor Hubert. Hubert was also a theologian, you can say, but also basically teaching them Plato and Aristotle. And their leaflets are a masterpiece of philosophical work, calling
like
people
anti-fascist, like resisting the tide of what they saw coming. Like, what years were they active then? 30s, I guess.
No, I think Scholl was executed. The Scholls were executed in 43,
Okay.
or perhaps 42, if I'm not mistaken. But they were caught, trialed, and executed on the same day by a guillotine.
Jeez.
And they have like the papers which they had in, like Sophie Scholl had, who was also a philosophy student, literature student, had, it's in the museum, in the Scholl Brother Museum now in Munich, where she basically had like scrap paper where she had the word Freiheit written all over it. Freiheit, namely freedom in German. And also Hans Scholl was seen being yelling the term Es lebe Freiheit while he was led to the guillotine. Their understanding, and this is something that had tremendous influence upon myself, is that that the system, they refer to the Nazi system, has put every man into a mental, a spiritual prison. And it is only within that mental prison, while they are lying in chains, they start to become aware of their faith and start to liberate themselves. And the act of liberation is by means of resistance. And the understanding that everybody, every individual is responsible for the crime and must work against the perpetrators and must work against fascism and the whole system of totalitarianism. And everybody are in position to put an end to the system, even if it means to offer passive resistance. And people have indeed paid a horrible price just for marginal acts of resistance, even if it meant just to loosening a screw in the war machine, even if it means just deeming that, like doing things on the very practical level that would hinder the war machine from operating. And also the understanding that we have to reconnect to our humanity and understand that we have not been so abused that we have forgotten that it is actually our basic duty to put an end to the system. And again, I come from a Holocaust surviving family, and nobody came for them. Absolutely nobody came for them when they were in a concentration camp. And I'm definitely not been so abused that I've forgotten that it is up to me to stand now for the people who are currently being kept in a concentration camp, bombarded, starved to death, and being burned alive.
Yeah, that's I'm glad you ended the White Rose story with that, because also, of course, that's also my mission in my first essay with this. It was about, I was the one in Hebrew school in America taking never again seriously. I was the one paying attention and the one asking difficult questions. The other part of, just to finish the Humboldt affair story, was I saw the headlines, and I'll put them up, that were calling you, what was it, like disgusting Jew hate in Germany, the normal anti-Semitic, because the piece of that story we left out is that there was a Holocaust survivor who was also going to be part of this event, who, I don't know, she was like sitting on the front row or something, and suddenly, because this is the way the media works, it's like, you, an Israeli-born Jew, is suddenly an anti-Semite, Jew hater, whatever. You know, I read those headlines, and it's disgusting, and it's. I want people to pay attention as we go on, and we can move past Humboldt now. But as we continue your story, you know, I just read your diary, which is full of like Frankel's book, Man's Search for Meaning, and you're drawing inspiration from Holocaust survivors, and like this is it's so despicable how the anti-Semitism trope has been turned around directly at this cause, where you're leaning on, I don't know if it's not just Jewish resistance, but just resistance and paying attention to the plight of the Jew in the 40s and the 30s in Europe and beyond, as inspiration for why we need to be acting now. So anyway, wanted to just underline that aspect of the slander that you also receive, because I'm getting it now too. I'm just a self-hating Jew, and you know. Yeah,
the slander was vicious.
Yeah.
Whenever I have a difficulty or kind of an emotional crisis, I turn back to the philosophical corpus. And there is a dialogue in Plato named Crito, where basically Socrates has been put on trial, and he's like with his buddy Crito, which is a kind of affluent, rich man. And Crito is telling him, hey, Socrates, you know, you don't have to show up to trial. We can just put you on a boat, and I'll take care of you. Because if I don't, people are going to think that I was too stingy to save you. And then the whole dialogue revolves around the question of, should we respect all opinions? So I don't respect all opinions. I respect only the honest opinions. And those who slandered me had definitely not an honest intention. They were political servants in the service of their masters. And as such, I feel more sorry for them for being in their own mental prison, their own mental slavery, to have acted in such irrational manner. I feel sorry for them, because accusing somebody from a Jewish background, yeah, it's absolutely obscene, and I feel sorry for them. And also, I do not respect their opinions, and I'm not concerned with things which are not in my control. I'm more concerned with things that are in my control. Because what is not in my control is nothing to me to worry about. I mean, anybody can slander me, can smear me, but should I be emotionally moved by that? Absolutely not. And again, like, we have to put things in perspective. I mean, we have to suffer slander, but I'm sitting here in my Berlin apartment, and my well-being is intact, whereas my Palestinians, brothers and sisters, are sitting in a tent, bombarded, and are being completely dehumanized. So we have to understand the kind, put things in proportion. And frankly, I don't respect those who support an apartheid genocidal state and seeking to oppress others. And also, just perhaps another point, the fact that they had to spend so much energy in trying to personally oppress me on the emotional level just goes to show how much the state and its servants are afraid of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let them smear me. Let them smear me as much as they want, because none of it concerns me. None of it is in my control. And I choose not to be. I'm definitely not moved by any of that.
Yeah. Me either. Amen. So let's go on to when did you encounter, I guess it's called Palestine Action. This is the group that's and targets, you tell me the whole activity, but Elbit systems in particular. So tell me about Elbit and the direct action and sort of the case for direct action where you're finding yourself climbing on factories and smashing windows.
Yeah. So Ronnie and I has been engaged for a very long time in the BDS campaign, which has also been the attempt to criminalize it in Germany. So we've been basically outlawed and criminalized in every possible way. And we've been working with different groups, and basically every group we were trying to work with, basically the first resolution they had was to kick Ronnie and myself out of the group, because we were insisting on emphasizing crimes against humanity, not just war crimes, but crimes against humanity, and not trying to criticize Israeli policies, but actually drawing attention to the very essence of the state that is built on supremacism and an illegal foundation. So, and whenever people heard that, even within the activist community, the first thing they did was to just kick us out. And so we really couldn't find ourselves within the kind of activist sphere in Europe. And like during the Humboldt trial, we had 2 trials. One of them, the first one got adjourned, and then we had another trial. And in the second trial, we met a few members of Palestine Action, came to support us from the UK. And there was also a great sense of urgency that we have to act, and that the means we have engaged so far are very limited, ineffective, and don't meet the ends that we are seeking. And we seek nothing less than abolishing apartheid. And to stop the war machine, and to do whatever we can, again, having the white rose in mind, to offer resistance within our own capacity. So, and it was a kind of an unverbal understanding that Ronnie and I had, that this is what we have to do. And so in 2021, we had our first action in Manchester. And I cannot say much about it because we still have a trial going on May 2025.
Do you guys get arrested for like every single one there's a trial, or is just a few
Yes.
select? Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Yes. So that was our first action, and we got arrested on the gates of the factory. And then we were given bail, and
just one quick note there, because we didn't really mention it. It's the Elbit factory. This is
the
weapons manufacturer that makes drones. Was it 85% of the drones that end up in Israel? You tell me the stats of what factory.
It's more than that. Elbit is not just the #1 arms company, Israeli private arms company that produces drone munition, technology, software, hardware to the Israeli military, but actually works on tandem with the Israeli Defense Forces. That means that if there's some kind of operational challenge on the field or on the fields of slaughter, Elbit system would come up with a technological solution. They call it handmade boutique solutions.
Artisan genocide now.
Exactly.
That's the new term. Yeah.
It's just like and the so-called products, commodities of genocide they produce are being sold all over the world to oppress not just the people of Palestine, but also the people of Kashmir, of Iraq, of Yemen, the US-Mexican border. And through also the Mediterranean Sea. So they are overseeing the entire, they are basically a tool of imperial oppression all over the world. But they do experiment on Palestinians' bodies in Gaza. So this is their testing ground. And this is what enables them to have the edge in the military industry, because it's just like you're selling a medicine, right? Like it has to be empirically approved. And they have something that not all weapons companies have. They have a battleground to test their weapons. And this is why they are so successful in the field of arms production. And this is why Israel is among perhaps the 5th biggest military industry in the world, although its population is less of that of London. So we have to keep the kind of power balance in mind. This is a $10 billion company.
And they have factories all over England, and then there's offices. It's a lot of sites.
It's a lot of sites. It's also located in Boston. There's been a really...
I think I saw that.
Yeah. It's all over the U.S. The U.S., by the way, the U.S. branch produces white phosphorus.
Right. Okay.
Which has been used in against the people of Lebanon. Just to explain to viewers that white phosphorus is a material that burns through one's bones, skin and bones. So basically opening the flesh. And it is...
I'll put the picture of it here. People probably know it, but it's the one that sort of looks like this white spider web that goes down. And it's often used in Lebanon. And
it burns, it eats through the flesh, so...
It's illegal to use in populated areas, obviously with international law, but consistently ignored by Israel, just so people can recognize the photo when they see it. It's a very recognizable weapon,
Exactly. So this is what is being produced in the U.S. So Elbit is one of the biggest perpetrators in the Middle East, and as I said, a tool of imperial oppression worldwide. So we were taking our first action in 2021, and then we were given bail. And just as bail was uplifted, our bail conditions were uplifted about. So we've taken the action in May 21, and then the bail conditions were uplifted in March 22. And then we've decided that it's time to finish the job. And we came back to the UK to take the Nakba Day action at the Bristol headquarters. And what we've done there was basically not even trying to go, from a different direction, but just simply going a frontal, just
Was
how
this
do
the
how
one
you
where
just
you drove the
storming.
van through
Yeah, we
the
just
through
we
the
just
gate?
got dropped by a van. We just
Right.
stormed the factory on the front,
Yeah.
and we just started slamming, like crushing
Drones.
all
I
the
think I saw the
windows,
footage. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, all
Is
the
this the
windows.
one where someone's inside with like the crowbar and stuff?
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. So basically, crashing our way through, and with the intention of mind to go on the upper floor where we believed that there were drones being produced. And what we do know, because obviously we done our research before taking over an arms factory, that it's Bristol headquarters where the hardware and like the software and the hardware, like where all the different parts of the drones are being assembled and are being like logistically um, constructed, and all the parts are being like there is an implementation of all the different parts of the drone, which is later on shipped to apartheid Israel to engage in a crime of genocide. And we were speaking of genocide even way before that, because settler colonialism and apartheid, the kind of only logical conclusion that is being drawn from those enterprises is the act of genocide. That's the ultimate goal. And so for some years it's been more creeping, like it's been more like slow, but now it's like a full-blown genocide. But
Yeah.
it's not difficult to see it happening. And so we also acted in a very high degree of urgency. We knew that weapons are being produced on a daily basis, with the intention of basically sabotaging the war machine, and also having the white rose in mind, because they are the one who taught us that we must sabotage armaments plants and all areas of science, and I'm basically quoting the war industry and all gathering, rallies, and public ceremonies, everything in the organization of the perpetrator. So we basically stormed the factory. We had very little time to crush whatever we could. And then, as the cops were closing on us, we barricaded ourselves in one of the conference rooms. We were trying to get access to different parts of the plant by basically using a bolt cutter and just cutting through the walls, going through the ceiling, and knowing that it only takes $10 worth of materials in order to stop a $10 billion worth of an industry, arms industry. So in that sense, trying to overturn the power relations between oppressor and oppressor, oppressor and oppressed, you don't need much of an investment. Like, our power lies within our weakness. We don't have the resources of an arms industry. We barely, we barely have money for soy milk, right? So, but this is where our power lies. It is exactly the fact that the war industry is so weak because it relies on material power. Material power and matter can be destroyed. Matter can be eroded. And so this is our strength. Our
Yeah.
strength lies within our capacity of to transcend the circumstances and employ very little means in order to reach maximum results.
And you get, I'm going to kind of zoom a little bit to the end here, because that you get arrested,
Yeah.
charged with burglary and something else, like 2 or 3 counts or whatever it is, and then were you offered a plea to pay a fine or have some probation or something, or jail time, and you chose the jail time, and then you spent
No.
Oh, how
No,
did it go?
there was none of that.
Oh,
We
no.
were not offered anything, and we were definitely refused. But we were not offered anything. We didn't think that we were going to be kept for a month in prison. That never happened before.
Right.
That wasn't the case. We thought maybe 10 days, a week. A week was the maximum. to have an activist ever held to be remanded. But once it happened, I kind of embraced the circumstances and learned how to transcend the circumstances and realize that whatever price I have to pay, I'm gonna pay it without any regrets. And it's just that we really weren't prepared. We didn't think they would imprison us. But basically, when we got first arrested, not only that they didn't offer any plea, I mean, it's not very much the case in the UK, but not only that they didn't offer anything of that sort, like they basically woke me up when I was in the police station, woke me up in like in the middle of the night. It was like 3 a.m. and I have it documented because I have a custody document, like the custody records documented. And they woke me up in the middle of the night and told me, "Oh, you gotta sign something." And I told them, "I ain't signing nothing. I'm not even like, English is not my like mother tongue. I don't even know what the full meaning of what you're telling me right now." So, but they wanted me to sign. They basically charged us with the first action we've taken. And that was the kind of context which they could show the judge. They say, "Oh, these are repetitive offenders, so you better lock them up." And this is how they've managed to get us in prison. And it was only Ronnie and I who had to stay a month in prison, whereas the others, and I was very happy for them, got released after 2 days. But it was never the case. It was just absolutely never the case. Today is very different because now it's even worse than in 2022. Today, the UK utilizes the Terrorism Act in order to imprison activists without even having to bring them in front of a judge.
And you also, to put a bow on that, because I want to get to with the future and a question about Germany, but you had some success then with Elbit, though. They shut down many plants or some factories at least. I mean, there was some tangible, you're costing this company a great amount of money at least, slowing something down that way.
The success has been overwhelming. Direct action has proven to be one of the most effective tools, if not the most effective tool that we have in our resistance toolbox, you can say. The first factories against which we were taking action in 2021 has been shut down. Another factory in Tamworth, where they assemble parts for the Merkava tank, has also been shut down. The London offices of Elbit Systems have been shut down, and they've lost a contract with the British Defense Ministry. Huge contracts, above 280 million pounds worth of contracts directly connected to our activity. And we are very proud of it. And we cannot be more keen on, more excited and to see the entire genocidal premise of Elbit system getting kicked out of the country, and not just there, but all across Europe. Because they do engage in illegal activity. And none of us, taxpayers, you can say, should fund or should be coexisting with this scum of the earth, basically.
Yeah. So what do you, because I want to get to what you think should happen in the world now. What do you, and also just as a plug for anyone, you were kind enough to send me a preview of your prison diary, which is like a 40-page, 35-page, really beautiful, almost a set of near poetry essays, and your entries that, like I was telling you, enters the long storied list of prison journals with just amazing thoughts about freedom and quotes, and I think you put it on Freedom Press, some of the early pieces. Anyway, you're putting it out as an ebook, so I'll definitely link to that when that's there. It's fantastic, just as far as like the poetry and reference on it. Now I get all the White Rose references in it. But this all happened before October 7th, and the global conversation changed very, very quickly. Tell me what you were thinking on that day, of October 7th, as you were watching it unfold, what maybe you were predicting what the response would be? I could tell you I under-predicted it by a long shot. I didn't think it was going to be this. And now what, where you think the global conversation of anti-Zionism goes. And then also really importantly, because I know I still get some haters who watch me. What do you want to happen there? Like, what is your vision of happening there? What can be saved, if anything? Maybe certainly not of the Zionist vision. I'm on board with that language, but of the people, of the structure, if anything. But what's changed after October 7th? Because it seems we're at, I hope, the very violent end cycles of this awful regime and this awful ideology. But I don't know where it falls yet. So take me to what you were thinking.
By examining Israeli sociology, I was able to kind of draw the conclusion that there are mechanisms, sociological mechanisms and linguistic mechanisms whose entire goal is to obfuscate and conceal the very colonial nature of the Zionist premise. So, and to basically dehistoricize the entire premise. So, also understanding that Israel was built as a European colonial project in a time where decolonization has already begun. So we are talking the end of the 19th century, where people across the colonial and semi-colonial world are beginning to rise up. So in a time where the kind of mentality is to never accept a foreign rule upon oneself. But there are mechanisms, discursive mechanisms, that conceal that very fact. And so it's very much explains why Israelis were so shocked to have that very abruptive act of violence and atrocity. And I actually don't want to belittle what was happening there, because it was a very violent act, just like the Nate Turner was a very violent act, just like John Brown engaged in very severe violence against the slave masters.
The Dakota 38, I go on and on and on with all these examples, but I hope, yes, of course.
Yeah. So we should not belittle that, and we should not omit that fact.
Right.
Nonetheless, I think the Israelis were so overtaken by that and got really traumatized by that, because they have forgotten that they are the colonialists of the land, and their existence would never, their existence as colonialist and supremacist, not their just very existence, would never be accepted. It was never accepted, and they gain their statehood only by means of force, only by what is known by the process of the Nakba, which is still ongoing. So we cannot judge a slave rebelling, and it is not our position to do so. I also personally think that, I don't know, but maybe it's just me, but I would never go on a party which only a few miles away from a concentration camp. And I didn't. I couldn't stand my own presence in Tel Aviv, knowing what was happening only 16 miles away. And so that very act, and again, I don't blame the people who were dancing, but I blame the mechanisms. I blame those who are propagating the political ideology that render legitimacy to that undertaking. The discourse have changed, but at the moment it happened, I understood that the Israeli reaction is going to be completely that's the end. I understood
Really?
That's the
You
end.
knew it was going to be this bad.
I knew it deep inside. That's it. Because Israelis really, the whole mental foundation is built on violence. You have to understand what is a settler. A settler is a person holding a gun against the native in an attempt to possess a certain space by means of force.
Yeah.
And it's very simple, and this is what they're doing, and their whole existence is built on oppression, on oppressing the natives and their claim to the land. And it is therefore that Israel will always meet resistance. It might suppress this wave of resistance, but there's going to be a new generation that is going to resist in their own way.
Yeah.
And so we are in an ever-ending, it is a periodical cycles of resistance and oppression and resistance. And it's going to retain so unless Israel is going to change the very definition on which it is based. Apartheid cannot be sustained for much longer. It is not only it is illegal, not just by any higher moral law, but also by actual law. It is a crime against humanity. It has to be abolished. It has to be abolished, just like slavery was abolished in the US, just like apartheid South Africa was abolished. And in order to abolish that, all we have to do is to create equal civil standing among not just from those who are considered, like myself, privileged Jewish Israeli, who are considered the Ubermensch, and those who are considered the Untermensch, right? We have to create an equal society where people are free to live their identities and their culture, and to be on equal footings with anybody else. So I'm basically just establishing an equal civil space for everybody, where all the sons and daughters of the land, from the river to indeed the sea, can be living on an equal, to live in equality. Now, to say equality today is just this word, just equality, is the most threatening term that genocidal Zionists and their genocidal supporters in the West are fearful of.
Yeah. That was beautifully said. And I'm always trying to find some silver lining of how we're going to get out of this thing. And, I'm hearing the rumors of, Israel just going to annex the West Bank. And I'm sure that is a horror show for some people. But in some ways, it's almost like we were saying of like, let's just be honest about this and get it over with about what we're going to do. Because, you and I grew up in a time where the West Bank was called disputed, or every name for it other than, is it Israel or is it Palestine? What is it? Because if they call it Israel, you suddenly have an apartheid that we all know is operational. Because who are these people? Now they're in your state with lesser rights. Or if you don't, if it's disputed, well, then what the hell are you doing in it? You're occupying someone else's land. So like, they can't have it both ways. And let's get on with it. You want to annex it? Let's talk about what that means. Because then we're going to call you an apartheid state, and you won't have any way to get out of it. It's so bad that I'm just hoping that this is the end. When you said that there's going to be cycles of periodical, like I don't think we can handle another one. I mean, this just has to be it. This has to be the end of it. And I think I don't know if that's how you feel, because my final question to you, because I've kept you so long, even though it's great, is about what you think the future of sort of, maybe, I know your academic work, but the future of this direct action and activism and what the targets should be, because I keep trying in my work to expand this conversation. Clearly something has happened in the world, and a lot of people are energized about Palestine, some for the first time, learning a lot of this history. And now what do we do with it? Where do we take it? And I've been trying to expand it to a larger conversation, and I think you are as well. For example, the last conversation I had with Vijay Prashad, we spent half the time talking about the thing you were talking about there, the post-World War II African liberation wave, which is crazy because in that entire wave, meanwhile, little old Israel is being built as a new colonization project. So it's perfect the way you're saying. It's like, while the fight against the tide of this is going this way, it's like Europe's trying to just squeeze one more in there before it all collapses. And it was always an insane idea. But yeah, so where do you think we can take this? Because I want this to be the end. I don't think we can handle another generation of this periodic oppression resistance cycle, because that's a very nice academic way to put it, but on the ground we just can't live with this anymore.
So as I said, Israel was built against the tide of history.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, the tides are going to be too strong. And I've been under house arrest in the UK, and I've learned what a really strong tides are. And there's like, and we do see the moment Israel is, it is like the secret is that Israel is in a devastating state.
Yeah.
Its economy has collapsed. Its intelligentsia has left.
Yeah. You're one of them. I mean, this is like, you left.
Not sure about the intelligence there, but
I've read your sociological work. Let's count you in. Go on.
yeah, but like it is being deprived of all of its productive powers, and the only thing it has left, it's only its violent tendencies. And the thing is that if Israel is pushed to the corner and if it feels just like a threatened animal, that its existence is threatened, it's going to resort to desperate means, including nuking whoever it needs to nuke, and that would be the end. And we are in fact in a very kind of things can really deteriorate really fast, but I think there's also a great potential of change. You know, I'm sitting here in East Berlin, but like more than like 20, 30 years ago, that was not the same state where I sit at the moment. So there's gonna have to be a regime's change, and it doesn't not have to be in any violent mean. It can be, there's can be a peaceful transformation of the very essence of the regime, from one that propagates racial supremacist ideology to one that propagates equality. So, and people who were here, sitting here, perhaps in this apartment just 30 years ago, they could not imagine that the tides would change, that there would be a regime change, and it happened from one day to the next, and the same can happen in Israel. And I don't know much about the future. For me, it's quite hard to even think of tomorrow. Like literally, it's quite hard, but I know that, you know, the state, although it has ultimate power, it has state power. It is still something that is being sociologically constructed, that is being socially constructed, and at the end, it's just a concept, and concepts can has certain dynamics within them, and they can be reshaped according to new forms of consciousness and understanding. So I just hope, I'm more focused on the actual struggle of Palestinians and supporting my comrades and engaging in the direct action campaign that Palestine Action has established, that has been so successful, and just trying to focus on what we as individuals with very little means can do. We have no longer any capacities to appeal to the state. The state is also a part of the system of oppression. We don't have any capacities to beg for to stop the illegal manufacturing of weapons. We have to take action, and not just to appeal to the power that be. For example, there is the famous David Graeber quote saying, direct action is like, instead of asking the power that be to dig a well and not being answered with anything, it's just digging the well yourself and daring them to stop you. And this is the kind of politics that I engage in. I dare the authorities to stop me. I dare them to stop me, and engaging in rhetoric and understanding that the ruling elite and its arms production and its arms factories and that has ultimate power, as I said, they are still weak, and we have to make them tremble. This is our capacity. They have to feel fearful in order to be able to change anything, and it is our role as individuals and activists to make them feel terrified of us. I just want to just emphasize that, like, seeing the genocide happening every day, being broadcasted, with each day, myself and my comrades die within ourselves more and more, seeing that. And the only way to liberate ourselves from this inner death that we are experiencing, what's happening to our comrades, is to take action.
Yeah.
And it's only if we reclaim our own agency, as we have in Bristol, as we have in Manchester, as we did in Humboldt, as we did in the West Bank. This is our capacity to liberate ourselves from the mental prison that the state has put us in.
Yeah.
And that although Berlin, Germany has been very oppressive in terms of what one can do. I mean, we have absolutely no political freedom to engage in nothing.
Yeah.
We have still not forgotten that perhaps our bodies are confined to certain limitations, but our thoughts are always free. There is one thing that they cannot take away from us. They can put us in prison, they can put us in wherever they want, but our spiritual capacity is much stronger than any of their material weapons.
Yeah. That's really good. I should also say, you know, the direct action of what you can do can feel incredibly small. Maybe people aren't as brave as you or they don't just can't spend time in jail. You even wrote being like, oh, I don't have kids. Like, people have their own considerations where they might not be able to do what you can do. And I'm going to use this as a little preview that you'll probably like, because I'm writing a short essay. I'm filling out a blank ballot for my U.S. election. And I'm writing a short essay about that because a lot of people say, well, you could do something at the ballot box. That's my direct action. And I'll hold it up here because I've been reading from it again. It was Slavoj Žižek's book on violence is part of the reason that convinced me. This is a little preview based on what you said and what you wrote about direct action. So I'll tell you what my direct action regarding the U.S. election is coming up. Because as I said way back when I put that flag, I do think there is there's a lever to pull about changing opinions. So I'm trying to do it, of course, on this show, but it's mostly in America right now. Maybe that's just the way I'm reading the world and the tea leaves about the urgency of stopping what's happening. I mean, I don't know the numbers, but 99% of the weapons that end up in Israel are American. So I feel a direct action path that way.
Yep.
But I'll let you go. This has been over 2 hours. I'll cut it down a little bit, but this was amazing. And just thank you. And that was great.
Thank you.